This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode number 139 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast, just after Thanksgiving weekend. Hopefully you all had a safe and happy and wonderful Thanksgiving holiday in 2022. My name is Noah Grant, joined alongside by Nick Maxon, who is, I was going to say out of the country, but then you are, but like not by much, I guess.
Technically, no.
Yeah, it's by jurisdiction. But anyway, he's in Puerto Rico, in case anyone was curious. We'll touch on that, obviously, in the main portion of the show, as he is on vacation. Other teams, though, not on vacation, besides our men's hockey team, who, of course, was off this last week. They're back in action against North Dakota this week. We'll touch on them and everything coming up in the NCHC. Otherwise, around NCAA men's hockey world, we'll certainly take a look at the pairwise and really take a look at a mini deep dive into some of the other conferences and see if there's anything interesting going on. Keynote, there is. There's been a lot of craziness going on. Again, I mean, we've talked so much to people who have just said, we don't even know who's good this year because so many teams have beaten each other at every echelon and every ranking in the standings, essentially. So excited to touch on that. Minnesota Wild will recap their latest week, including the Marco Rossi move, some guy by the name of Ryan Reeves, and then some net moorings not staying put in a game against Toronto that certainly caused the ire of some. And then the extra ice session, Logan Cooley inspired, although a lot of people have already jumped in on this year already. The Michigan, the lacrosse style goal, whatever you want to call it, it's becoming routine, and we love it here on the Huskies Warming House podcast, and we're going to deep dive into that as always. And we start with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Center Ice View News and Notes, Noah, and shall we say this was a week of milestones? Particularly, you could say some big ones, right? So first one, Lindy Ruff gets his 800th win as an NHL head coach. This came as the Devils beat the Washington Capitals. Speaking of milestones, Noah, 13-game winning streak earlier by the Devils. This Devils team is pretty good. Boston, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, got snapped in that game where they had 3 disallowed goals against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So certainly stinks to see that come to an end. But the New Jersey Devils train is certainly rolling.
Yeah, very much so. A train that I think a lot of folks thought would be rolling a lot quicker than it has, but it finally looks like it's gotten, shall we say, rolling with nothing ready to stop it. Speaking of trains not really ready to stop, how about another Eastern Conference team? The Boston Bruins set an NHL record 12 straight home wins to start the season. They did it against Carolina again on Friday. So kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's Boston, so.
Great, yeah, great on the ice, not so great off of it.
Yeah. How about that? So, speaking of great on the ice, though, Cale Makar, he's pretty good on the ice. He became the fastest defenseman ever to record 200 points in 195 games. He accomplished that. So, I'm no mathematician, but that's better than a point a game.
Yeah.
He did this 12 games faster than the previous record holder. That was someone I grew up watching with the Dallas Stars, Sergei Zubov, who did it in 207 games. Ryan Leach, who was also another All-American defenseman, he did it in 211. So you talk about skill sets at the defenseman level. Offensively, the mark has been set now by Cale Makar.
Yeah, what a great hockey player. And you think about the great defensemen in history, right? Because Bobby Orr is tied for like 5th on that list at, I think, 216 or something like that. There's a bunch of guys between 211 and 220 that are all in the top 10 in that mix. And, not to say, obviously, Cale Makar, a very good hockey player, but some of these names that pop up on this list are not guys that you think of as household names for guys who, were shoe-ins for first ballot Hall of Famers, guys that were franchise icons, so to speak, right? I mean, Cale Makar isn't even the franchise icon in Colorado right now. Sergei Zubov really wasn't. He was a great defenseman. Brian Leach certainly wasn't, but you think of a guy like Nick Lidstrom, right? Nick Lidstrom doesn't even crack the top 10 in this. So you talk about consistency in your game as well, too. Being a great defenseman, point production wise, certainly takes a good team around you, but also a little bit of, in your first 200 games, being able to, or 200 points, I should say, being able to feel confident in an NHL sweater quickly. And that can mean the difference in those first 10 to 15 games for you to put some points together, and certainly some interesting names if you get a chance to go check out the list.
Certainly will be. Speaking of interesting names, Noah, how about Carolina signing a netminder, Pyotr Kochetkov, 4-year extension, $2 million a season. He was the 36th pick overall in 2019, has a .914 save percentage. That's quite the name. I don't know if it's going to be a household name, and shall we say Carolina has had its fair share of, shall we say, interesting goaltending management situations.
Well, you think that's an interesting name? You should look up what his nickname is. But it's kind of crazy. Carolina has certainly had a great start to the season. They're certainly a team to watch in the Eastern Conference, but their net mining situation has always kind of been in flux a little bit ever since the departure / slight downfall of Cam Ward at the end of that era. They really haven't had a netminder besides Freddie Anderson last year, who finally kind of brought them back to resurgence. Now they're missing him, obviously, with certain key injuries. So this Carolina team, as long as they get goaltending, the rest of the play in front of their net has certainly taken care of itself.
Certainly has. Speaking of taking care of business, yes, for the old folks who like that. Old school song, I forget, that's the Doobie Brothers, yes. So more than 20 groups, Doobie Brothers, yes, have expressed interest in buying the Ottawa Senators. This is a good thing. I know that we've talked about some flashy names such as Canadian actor Ryan Reynolds, who already co-owns Welsh Football, and also, it's with Rob McElhenney, and that club is Wrexham AFC. Now, here's where it gets interesting. That name has been out for a couple of weeks, but apparently some billionaires, such as the likes of Michael Andlauer and Rocco Tullio, these guys own OHL's Hamilton Bulldogs and Oshawa Generals. These are some of the newer names that have come forward, some guys with deeper pockets. Now, mind you, Reynolds jokingly said, I believe it was on Late Night with, Stephen Colbert, that he would need deep pockets. Someone with that to help him purchase the team. So good to see that there is an interest in the NHL franchise, and especially in, I don't know if you want to call it a financial hotbed, Noah. So good to see that at least there's interest there. And it sounds like at some point, one of these groups is going to end up having signing the paperwork to take over ownership.
Yeah, going to be curious who it would be. Maybe it is the former singer of Taking Care of Business, the Bachman-Turner Overdrive. And, it's interesting that there is so much interest in a team like Ottawa, because really their arena location and all the things that have gone on with them have kind of made some people a little bit apprehensive about the way the Sens are. And certainly they've had a really poor start to the season after a year that we thought, at least on paper, they were going to turn things around. They really have struggled. Some people point to DJ Smith and removing him. The players say, no, it's just us not playing well. Some people think it's not DJ Smith, but it's time to fire him for a change anyway. I don't really know. The Sens are in a really weird spot. They kind of remind me a little bit of where the New Jersey Devils were in the past couple of years, where they were expected to be better on paper at least, and they just, for whatever reason, with injuries and coaching and goaltending and whatever mix it was that year, just couldn't quite find any traction. Very curious to see if a new ownership group might solve any of that. it's been weird, to put it lightly. How about we stay up in Canada though? This one, of course, dropping this past week. Yeah, what do you got?
How about this? Another NHL team in Ontario wouldn't know anything about terrible ownership, right? in their history, right?
Yeah,
Harold Ballard. Does that name still like give people the jeepers and the critter crawlers at the back?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think if you're a Minnesota fan, I think you're too tied up with the North Star stuff to pay attention to anything else. I mean, it's
yeah,
that talk about ownership struggles to say the least on that side of things as well too. But yeah, hockey has had its fair share, although the most difficult ownership group doesn't even belong to Ottawa. It belongs to a team that plays in a college hockey rink as a National Hockey League team this season. But let's move to a team that is valued much higher than the aforementioned Arizona Coyotes, the Toronto Maple Leafs. This dropping last week, legend Bjorn Salming died at age 71, just a couple weeks after his ceremony at the Air Canada Centre, or Scotiabank, whatever it is now, up there in Toronto from complications with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And I thought this was really interesting. Daryl Sittler, of course, former teammate of Salming, was extremely emotional during that salute to Bjorn, and he kind of reflected this past week on that, and he said he's at peace now. If it had to be, you couldn't have scripted his last days better, spending time with me, Tiger Williams, Lanny McDonald, Jim McKenney, all the Hall of Fame Swedes. What made us feel good was his wife saying that since his diagnosis, she'd not seen him happier. Of course, he's the all-time Leafs leader in assists at 620 and fourth in points at 768. Third in games played at just under 1,100. His number 21 was raised to the rafters in 2006, officially retired in 2016. And of course, he's also got a statue outside the arena with some of the Leafs greats as well, too. I mean, you and I talked about the ceremony and how emotional that was, and you can see that he was really worked up. I mean, what a loss for the game of hockey and the Toronto Maple Leafs as a franchise to have one of the legendary Swedes who paved the way for a lot of European players to come into the National Hockey League pass away. It's just, it's tough, but you bring some comfort and solace in the fact that he was around some really great people near the end.
He was. And, you talk about sometimes, Noah, sometimes life has these sort of really odd ways of timing.
Yeah.
And it's to set the table. We talked about this previously, but Börje Salming came into the NHL, and even the fans at the time, even though he was so good, because he was a European player, he was sort of ostracized. He was not really welcomed by the North American players, the fans. And for him to get that moment 2 weeks ago where he got that love and affection that he really, truly deserved for all that he did for the Maple Leafs, for the game of hockey, as you mentioned, for the European players that have now come over and there are, just as much welcome as anybody else, right?
Yeah.
You almost think in a human way, did he need that moment? I almost kind of feel like he did.
Yeah.
He absolutely deserved that moment. And, it's just, again, less than 2 weeks later, he succumbs to ALS. Again, a very terrible disease. Yeah. It's tough, but, again, it's just one of those deals where he kept his head high. He was always in a positive mood, and just unfortunate that it happened so quickly thereafter.
You talk about closure, right? And, everyone is looking for that, right? The storybook ending, so to speak, even in situations like this. And I think that ceremony was something that really gave us that, really gave Leafs Nation a way to pay their respect, but also let the Salming family know that he wasn't forgotten in that organization, and he wasn't alone in that fight, regardless of how long, he had left at that particular moment. And you talk about, him not originally being accepted, and then you go a couple years later to the All-Star game, and he got the biggest standing ovation of any player on the ice, and hockey fans really started to embrace him in the late 70s and early 80s. So certainly a big loss for the hockey community, one that will be felt for a long time, but a player that certainly will be remembered throughout history as a Hall of Famer. Moving on over to our second to last topic here, trades and transactions. We'll talk about this one in the main portion of the show, but we'll lay it out, of course, for you. Ryan Reeves heading to Minnesota for a 2025 fifth-round pick. Like we said, we'll talk about that in the main portion of the show. Toronto Maple Leafs acquiring defenseman Connor Timmins from the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for minor league forward Curtis Douglas. Timmins is 24, 7 assists in 41 career NHL games across 4 seasons. This, of course, is to bolster their defensive roster for an injury that we'll get to in just a few moments. And then Shane Wright, we talked about this a couple weeks ago on our show, sent to the AHL on conditioning loan. He can be there for 14 days under the terms of the loan because Kraken head coach Dave Haxtell scratched him for 5 straight games, triggering the rule that allows the one-time loan despite the fact that he's only 18. And then Seattle's expected to release him to Canada's World Junior squad next month to get him some seasoning. So they're kind of playing the system a little bit, but It's a really weird thing because if you played in the CHL in any sort of process there, even if you played a single game, you go back to the CHL until you're AHL eligible when you've aged out. But if you played overseas, like for example, where Austin Matthews did, you could go directly back overseas and play overseas. So it's the NHL kind of has a weird stipulation where it doesn't really favor guys like this who maybe need that AHL seasoning. He's going to get it a little bit, but the saga continues.
It does. And we talked about this at length tonight, and we kind of, shall we say, had conflicting, thoughts about it. I think one thing that this conditioning loan has proved, because he's already scored a few goals, I think certainly he's shown that he's, quite over-skilled for the CHL. It's certainly one of the questions is going to be is this a confidence thing with him? Are there certain, facets of the game that they really want him to be better at? Because we talked about ice time with this more as like the main sort of argument point, and we had some differentiating opinions. I'm still on the fence of what Seattle's doing, because it certainly has been at least reported that it does not seem to be what I originally thought, which is maybe there was an immaturity issue, maybe shall we say maybe an attitude issue. It does not seem to be that way with him now. Mind you, that could be just covered for the kid, but I think the answer is still out there, right? Whereas you send him to the juniors, he's got to come back. You've already used your one-time AHL conditioning loan. So what is the long-term approach here by Seattle? Yeah, because effectively running out of options to sort of delay the process, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and there's no doubt he can play hockey. The other thing that we didn't really anticipate is Seattle is much better this year than I think we had expected. So they certainly are kind of in the mix, which definitely changes things as well. We'll definitely keep an eye on that. Have to see how he does for Team Canada. Injury-wise, heading back over Toronto, the Maple Leafs, of course, because of their move with Connor Timmins, due to Morgan Rielly now on long-term injured reserve with a knee injury. They've had a decimated defensive core once again this season. Then the only other one, Bruins netminder Linus Ullmark, was out with an arm injury. He just got cleared earlier today on Monday, but it sounds like he's not at 100%. And welcome into the main portion of the show. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, welcome in from down over yonder, so to speak, in Puerto Rico on vacation. How has the vacation been? It certainly looks like the beaches have been warm, and it's been about 20 to 25 degrees in America's wasteland. So I'm going to assume the the Fahrenheit scale is a little bit better where you're at, I'm assuming.
If you convert it to degrees centigrade, it's about even.
Yeah.
So it's been a little bit of beach, but today it was a lot of hiking, miles of hiking. We actually went to the only tropical rainforest that's in the United States. Had some fun there hiking up quite high, actually. Took some video, took some pictures, and definitely deserved the beer after that 4 hours of hiking. There's no question about it. There were steep inclines too. So still have a few days left. There's some definitely other items that we have planned. So, but it's been good. 85 degrees and sunny and a lot of green has been nice to see.
Yeah, certainly. It's not quite snowy here in America's wasteland, but certainly the wind is starting to pick up, although it was mid-50s all weekend last weekend, which is very uncharacteristic of things and all that jazz. For those who don't know, of course, Nick, in his new job with North Iowa in the NAHL, I myself was a little bit busy this weekend. You'll probably get to see it by the end of the week, is what I was told, is that I was actually on the ice with the team. They were doing an all-star skills competition, then I was doing GoPro footage during the 3-on-3 and certainly just basically buzzing up and down the ice for 40 minutes, and my legs thanked me very much not so the next day when I woke up yesterday. So certainly was a lot of fun. So a lot of things going on here. One thing I probably can tell you, at least as far as I know, is I think we should be back to normal at least for next week or somewhere around there, I think. I think we should be closer to a Sunday release again next week, if not a little bit later on Sunday, but I think we might be there. If that changes, we'll let you know, of course, as always, at Warming House Den on Twitter. Big Ten news here, moving to the NCAA. A couple of Big Ten non-conference games that we'll throw in there, and then a couple of Big Ten opponents that played NCHC or independent opponents. So they're kind of scattered throughout, so bear with us as we go through that. Let's start with Notre Dame. Their single matchup on Wednesday against Boston University, and the Terriers handily taking this one by a score of 5-2. Notre Dame not able to get a victory there. And then Alaska Fairbanks, Penn State, a lot tighter than I think a lot of people expected on Tuesday and Wednesday. Penn State both 1-goal victories, 3-2 on Tuesday, 2-1 on Wednesday. This Fairbanks team has kind of interrupted people and given them some fits. I don't think that they're a particularly strong hockey team, but as we've kind of alluded to, it's kind of hard to tell who's really good this year in college hockey. You can maybe name about 4 teams, maybe 5 that you would throw in there. And then after that, it's kind of been a free for all for, spots 6 through 20, so to say.
I would even go 25.
Yeah.
Honestly, it certainly isn't a season that we normally, view, Noah, which is, you have teams that separate themselves, especially around the Thanksgiving holiday for sure, before the bigger holiday break, the midseason break.
Yeah.
We just don't have that this year. I think we have at the top, you have Minnesota, which I think is in the elite tier. I think St. Cloud State is in the elite tier, and I'm not saying that because I'm just a St. Cloud State guy. I truly believe that they're that good and they're that balanced.
Yeah.
Michigan is maybe there just because of their talent when they can actually put up everybody on the ice.
Yeah, I think the only 3 teams right now are Minnesota, St. Cloud, and Denver are the only 3 that I can look at. Maybe even Penn State a little bit, although they had kind of an interesting week the week before. But you mentioned Michigan, by the way. Why don't we jump over to a conference we don't talk about very much, the ACAC. The Michigan Wolverines played host to Harvard, who, of course, is leading or second, I believe, in the ECAC by a single point, 1 point behind Quinnipiac. A 4-4 overtime tie the first night before Michigan, a 4-1 victory in night number 2. And if you thought that wasn't hairy enough, this UConn Huskies team that we said was very good and still is very good in the top 10 in the country, absolutely walked 6-0 by Cornell, who, of course, was swept by Minnesota Duluth a couple weeks ago. So did I mention this is confusing? I don't even know any.
I don't know if it's confusing. It's more of just like, everybody's trying to figure out who the heck everybody is, because there are weeks where these teams you talk about, UConn, Michigan, Harvard, Fairbanks, Penn State, where they show us signs that they are an upper echelon team. And then the next weekend, they take a weekend off, for lack of a better phrase, and then they make us question who this team is. It's a seesaw. And it's just hard to get a read on a lot of teams right now. And
I think this is maybe the first time in a while, at least, maybe even ever, where we can almost somewhat definitively say that parity has finally inked its way into all corners of the country when it comes to college hockey. And it's been very, very exciting to see. CCHA 2.0, Mankato traveling to Michigan Tech. Michigan Tech, a 3-2 victory in night number 1, and then a 2-2 overtime finish in night number 2. People called this an upset, Nick. And I mean, we've looked at this at the pairwise, and they were, even the last couple of years, this Michigan Tech team is a good hockey team, and they have been for the past couple of years, where their program has been on either the outside looking in on the bubble, or they've been just inside that bubble. This year, I think this team could make a case to maybe potentially slip in that 10, 9, 8 spot in the pairwise if they continue to roll. Are they that good? I don't know, but I certainly think they're a team that has the potential to maybe win this conference this year. They've had a decent run.
I think the bigger takeaway is not how good Michigan Tech is. I think the bigger takeaway is Mankato, although we thought this would happen, is certainly not as strong as we've seen them even as early as last year.
Well, we've talked about the goaltending piece too, and I think, we listened to Marissa Voss and Alex Micheletti talk about this a lot on MNCAA. Keenan Rancier is a sophomore who basically had a couple minutes of coffee last season in a single hockey game. And then Alex Tracy, of course, brand new. And they talk about the frustration and they keep saying, oh, this guy's not the guy, or, we need to give this other guy a look. Goaltending is going to take time. We talked about this with Colorado College and Caden Mberko and how it's going to take him as a freshman a little bit of time to get up to speed. Let's think about a guy like David Rennick. How long were Huskies fans riding him before he really became the goaltender that we believed him to be, right? Goaltending is a fickle thing. This Mankato team certainly has enough firepower in front of them to still stay pat in that conference. But like you mentioned, they are not the team of yesteryear that went to a national championship game last season. They just aren't.
No.
And I think that's fair to say. Lake Superior State swept for the first time ever, the first ever sweep in team history, especially in conference play for the St. Thomas Tommies, a 4-0 and 2-1 finish. And Rico Blasi was somewhat subdued after this, like it was routine and nonchalant. Even if he wants to act as even keel as he can be, I think talking to our reporter and Ryan Stieg, among others, you can tell this is a big deal for this program to finally get this marker checked off and really kind of move on and really build some traction moving into the holiday break.
It isn't in my opinion, honestly, Noah.
Yeah.
I think it's more relief because, again, 4 of 6 that they lost were all by a 1 goal, and they were either tied or had a lead and lost it, or were tied and had opportunities either on the power play to take a lead. They just kept finding ways to lose games versus trying to find ways to win games. Now, mind you, a 4-0 shellacking on Friday helps.
Yeah.
A much tighter contest on Saturday at 2-1. But this is, you talk about just trying to get that streak off your back. And finally, I think it's less about the sweep than it is about finding the win column again. The fact that it happened twice in the same weekend, great, good for them. I'm curious to see, like you mentioned, what they do now with the extra confidence. And this is a situation where this team is still learning. I've talked about this before, where before they were trying to find ways to be competitive. Now they're trying to find ways to win and now keep winning, right? Because now teams are going to look at you more seriously. They're going to analyze film. And that's been the big, sort of quagmire with St. Thomas, which is, can they repeat a full 60-minute effort the way that Rico Blasi wants them to play? So this feels good, yes, but I would be very curious to see how this team continues to play next weekend. That, to me, is going to be the real measuring stick, and no question in my mind, the measuring stick Rico Blasi is looking for, too.
Yeah, it certainly will be a tough test for them. They travel to Bemidji State next week. I don't think Lake Superior has had a really tough season. The Lakers are not good this year, unfortunately.
But again, at the same time, these were the teams that St. Thomas couldn't beat. And if you are looking for some sort of goodness, you're taking care of a team you should take care of. Okay, that's a step, right?
Yeah, certainly would agree. Hockey East, as we move over here, Holy Cross traveled to Merrimack last Tuesday. Merrimack handily winning 5-1. They will have UConn tomorrow, this upcoming Tuesday, from our recording, the 29th. So pay attention to that one. See if the Huskies can rebound against Merrimack, who's had a great trend as of late. And then UMass against UMass Lowell. This was Friday, Saturday, the Friendship 4 in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Quinnipiac had Dartmouth in night number 1, and then they hashed it out in night number 2. UMass beating UMass Lowell 2-1 in the first night, and Quinnipiac beating Dartmouth by a score of 5-2. So then UMass Lowell got Dartmouth, a 4-3 overtime victory, a much better response for Dartmouth in night number 2. And then UMass and Quinnipiac played to a 2-2 tie on that one. All things considered, boy, if you were in Northern Ireland, you certainly got some good hockey, I would say. And Dartmouth, besides the first night, kind of held their own against 3 other teams that certainly are probably better than them on paper, shall we say?
Yeah, and you kind of wonder too, with Dartmouth, it's always, shall we say, when you get the film and you're able to identify the game plan against you once you kind of know the tendencies, I think staying pat is a bit easier on Saturday night. Now, mind you, you still have to go out there and execute. And the fact that they were able to, get there.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they up there? No. But are they a team that you can glance over? No. Also, they're going to be at least competitive over there.
Well, speaking of competitive, Atlantic hockey has certainly had some wildness again this season. AIC did get Air Force last Sunday in that second half of that matchup. AIC beating Air Force 3-1, but then dropping a single Saturday contest to Maine by a score of 5-1. This Maine Black Bears team has given some teams fits again this season too. Again, there's so many teams that you can peg maybe 1, 2, or 3 teams in a given conference that are kind of the teams to beat. And then you have some middle of the pack teams and maybe spots 4 and 5, but then it's those 6 and 7 spots that are kind of causing issues for some conferences because they're sneaking wins or maybe getting a sweep here and there, and it's kind of creating havoc. I think the Maine Black Bears are maybe another one of those teams as well. Independent action. You want to talk about playing spoiler here, Nick. Long Island University, night number 1, a 3-2 victory over the Ohio State Buckeyes, who are reeling for a variety of things, but notwithstanding losing to Long Island, OSU did respond with a 4-1 victory in night number 2. We'll get back to the Buckeyes in just a few moments. If for those who know, you know, and we'll get back to that. And the other independent game, the Minnesota Golden Gophers splitting down at ASU, a 3-2 victory for the Gophers in night number 1 and a 6-5 overtime finish in favor of the Sun Devils in the second night. I don't think the Gophers played particularly well on night number 1. Second game was a barn burner. This ASU team, they've had some blips in the road, but again, they're a team that certainly has a chance to maybe sneak into one of those bottom spots come tournament time if they have a good push in the second half. I'm trying to think, when is the last time an independent team has made the national tournament? Alabama Huntsville, maybe?
Well, wasn't Air Force technically independent?
Oh, back in the mid-2000s? Yeah, someone knows the answer.
Or how about recently SCSU? I mean... Yeah, that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, but they were WCHA from early 2000s on. So I thought Alabama Huntsville...
Right, but they're their opponent, right? Aren't they an independent right now? Weren't they an independent back in 2019 Air Force?
Well, I don't know if they were or not. Maybe they were. I don't know.
I thought they were. I'm pretty sure they were.
2018, you mean?
18, 19.
Well, 19
tomato.
19 stung a lot more than 18 did for sure. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, great showing for Arizona State and the Sun Devils. Not sure who they have. They might be off this upcoming week. Minnesota certainly isn't, though. They'll have Michigan State coming up this week. Michigan travels to Wisconsin. Ohio State traveling to Penn State in the Big 10. CCHA, 4 matchups on the docket. Tech traveling to Northern Michigan, who was off last week. Bowling Green playing Lake Superior State. Ferris State traveling to Mankato, and like we mentioned, St. Thomas taking on the Beavers in Bemidji. ECAC, we are paying attention to Harvard and Cornell now because of how good Harvard has been, and Cornell playing spoiler a little bit here. And then at UConn against Merrimack this upcoming Tuesday, tomorrow. Providence home and home against Boston College, and UMass Lowell and UMass, a single Saturday game, seeing each other once again. They've seen a lot of each other in recent weeks. And then Atlantic hockey, 2 matchups here. A Thursday-Friday game, AIC has Bentley, and then Holy Cross travels to Air Force. Nick, good a time as any to bring up the Ohio State factor here.
Yeah.
This is difficult. So, of course, Ohio State recently announced that men's hockey player Kamil Sidloka, who, of course, I believe he's Polish, but he's lived in Illinois in the United States for most of his life. Yeah. And directing multiple racial slurs at Michigan State forward Jagger Joshua, who, of course, his brother Dakota Joshua was a senior when Sidloka was a freshman at Ohio State playing for the Buckeyes, and was a very good hockey player at that. And they talked a little bit about how the official finally caught the slurs after about 4 or 5 of them, tossed the OSU player out of the game, and then the Big 10 investigated but wasn't able to act on that. And I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of curious about this. You have that reaction. I think a lot of people do. And I was trying to say, is there a way that we can look at this where the Big 10 took no further action, not because they didn't want to take action, but is there a precedent to be set here where you have an official who sees something or let's say hears something, because in this case, it's not a blatant physical visible act. You didn't cross-check somebody in the head. You didn't slash them and, whatever. It's something that's verbally said on the ice. Official hears it, tosses a player, writes the incident report after the game. For those who don't know, in most hockey leagues, you have to file an incident report if there's a major penalty. You have to explain why it happened, what happened. Do you think that the Big Ten looked and said, we have this testimony from the official, but because we can't visually see what happened, we can't act on this like we would a slash or a cross-check, because it sets a precedent that says, oh, the official said, and I'm not saying it's not true because I believe it to be 100% true, but in a future case, potentially, where an official can say, oh, I heard this, quote unquote, now, and then the Big Ten takes action on something that you can't really verify, if that makes sense, even though I believe it to be 100% true. But do you think that's where they're coming from, or do you think they should have done more?
I think that is the framework that they're using to explain the lack of judgment from the conference. Now, you laid it out very well, Noah, which is, first of all, your referee hears something, and let's be honest, referees don't want to toss out players for something like that unless they know for sure what they heard.
Right.
So here's my question. If the Big Ten is saying that there's no indisputable evidence, then what the hell was a player getting ejected for something that was clearly heard, clearly understood, enough for him to get ejected from the game at that moment?
Yeah.
So that's the question, right?
Double-edged sword. Yeah.
So is it and I think here's the actual argument, is the Big Ten punting this away to essentially not be the, sort of the golden sword? They wanted, shall we say, the university to handle it.
Which, if I may clarify quickly, actually they did. So Ohio State, I mean, in the end, sending, of course, the player home away from practice and not releasing him, quote unquote. I don't know if he's officially off the team or they just send him home. But Ohio State actually, athletic director Gene Smith, after announcing that, did say, quote, "I want to offer my sincere and heartfelt apology to Jagger Joshua. On behalf of Ohio State, I am so sorry. No student or student athlete should experience hatred or racism, and everyone should feel welcome." Joshua himself, of course, said that he was, quote, "confused and pessimistic about the movement of diversity within hockey culture after the lack of moves by the Big Ten." And Smith, the director of Ohio State, then said players will soon undergo complete education on racial sensitivity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the use of respectful dialogue. Now, we've heard that phrase 100 million times in hockey. Mm-hmm. It's a step in the right direction, should it be enacted, but certainly I think there's always more to be done here. But as you kind of continued, one, should it fall on the university? Two, did the university handle this appropriately? And three, how do we handle this again? Because how many times have we talked about this issue coming up in hockey that certainly seems to be circling the wagons and not getting any better?
So I think the bigger question is, for the Big Ten, what would quantify as indisputable evidence? I think that is the question that has to be asked, because to me, I'll be frank, it's a bullshit answer. It's completely a bullshit answer. I'm sorry, but the Big Ten completely punted on this because they wanted the Ohio State to kind of handle this. Because I think, and the reality is, if the Big Ten has to step in, then effectively the bigger cry is, okay, there's more issues with leadership, whatever you want to call it, within the university, right?
Right.
So I think no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, how do you, again, and we talked about this, and like I said, I believe Big Ten officials, by and large, especially with this type of issue, to be credible, to be a credible source of information, filling out an incident report after a game to say, yep, this is what I heard, this is how I would clarify it. How does the Big Ten put in a framework to say, yep, we can admit this incident report written and filed by an official as credible evidence, but make sure it's vetted in a way that, make sure that officials don't essentially have free reign to potentially suspend a player for no reason? Because let's be real, people like to pay off other people. And if you influence one official come playoff time, that can change a lot of things. Not saying it's going to happen, not saying it has happened, not saying it should happen, but that's just kind of how things have the potential to happen.
Well, speaking of a rabbit hole that keeps getting deeper, my God.
Yeah.
Because first of all, let's stay on topic here, because I don't know that you're looking at the world the same way that it actually is.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of the Big Ten and saying, I don't disagree with you at all. I believe that they definitely push this down the road. But is there some credibility to be said that they don't want to set a precedent that where a written incident report can single-handedly decide a judgment call?
So that's the thing, right? Is I don't know if they want to do that per se, meaning I'm not sure if it's something that they've thought about and this is what they're trying to avoid. I think the bigger issue is they, like the NCHC in a certain way, is if they don't have to be the ones that are putting the hammer down, they prefer that. Yeah. Because again, it's more of, does it make it, it's more of like, okay, this is going to be a really terrible example, but it's more of like, okay, if the parent has to step in, like say your kid is off being goofy, right? And say the school isn't handling it, if the parent has to step in, then what's to say about the school kind of thing, right? So I think that is the framework they're using. That is, okay, this is your player. You know what's right. You know what happened. Don't make us do it, because if we have to do it, it's not going to be just the player that gets in trouble. Then there's going to be bigger consequences beyond that, which I really think that's where the slippery slope is. If the conference gets involved, Noah, it is, you're going to force us to investigate sort of things, meaning push people time and money to try to verify these things, right? Yeah. So if you make us do that, and you, the coach, aren't going to literally sit here and tell us that your player, when you're 6 feet behind him on the bench, did not hear that, then your butt's getting canned too. So that's how I see it. I think that's the reality of the situation, because at the end of it, we're in a society now that says we need to do the right thing, regardless if a mistake happens. And it's something that's so explicit, something that's in the nature that it was said. If an official hears it and like you said, he writes the incident report, come on, we all know it happened. You don't get tossed out of a game for that because I misheard something or misheard some other kind of chirping between the benches. We know what we heard, right? So that's the thing. There's so much chatter, right? That sticks out like a sore thumb, unfortunately. So the way I see it is Ohio State needed to handle it. They did after they also punted it down the road a little bit, because they were sort of looking for the Big Ten to take the lead before the Big Ten said, nope, this is your problem. They acted accordingly, but again, there's still the unknown, which is this an indefinite suspension? Is it a term suspension? Is this an expulsion from the team altogether? We don't know. So I guess the story yet has to be over, has to be, the final chapter has been written, but that's really what this is coming down to, is the schools are being told by the conferences, this is your player, you know what you got to do, take care of it, because if we do, more than just a player is having a bad day.
I certainly would agree. Final question on that topic very quickly, just maybe as a course of personal opinion. If you're Ohio State, you sent him home, let's say, and like I said, he might already be off the team, but let's say he's not off the team. Let's say he's in limbo right now.
Sure.
What is the correct action for Ohio State in this situation?
So if you're going to assimilate a guy back, right, let's talk about another issue that we have talked at length, the Mitchell Miller story, right? So I think, to me, if you're going to introduce this player back in your team, you have to also say, okay, this person has gone through some sensitivity training or a few different things that says, okay, I have gone through these conferences or done community service, a combination of things that shows, okay, I now understood how hurtful those things were. I'm not going to do it again. I think that's the sort of idea of reassimilating him back into the team would have to look like.
Sure.
I don't think you could just bring him back and say, oh, he's served a 4-game suspension and he's good to go. I don't think that that's good enough anymore, nor shouldn't it be, right? I think there has to be that additional step of going through some type of training I know I mentioned sensitivity training, or I'm not sure that's what they call it, but something where,
Right.
you are essentially understanding, hey, you said what you said, but let's take this a little bit deeper. This is what this really means and how this actually hurts a lot of people.
Yeah. And here's a second chance if you're willing to be a bigger person about this
Right.
too.
And this is your only second chance. If this happens again, you're not ever walking back to these doors again.
Certainly would agree. Well, let's talk about other doors in college hockey. The NCHC, our last conference, Omaha and Denver, the only matchup related to conference play. UNO, 3-0 victory on Friday night for the Mavs. And then DU, a 6-3 response in night number 2. His Mavs team playing spoiler.
Yeah.
Yeah, slowly but surely here. We'll get a look at the standings here in just a few moments. North Dakota traveling to and then at home against Bemidji State, a 3-3 overtime tie in a game in which the Fighting Hawks really had to claw back in this one.
They did.
And then UND, a 4-2 victory in night number 2. Northeastern Western Michigan was supposed to be at Bridgestone Arena. It was moved because of a broken water main leak that also affected the Predators game. There was water all over the street. It was streaming across the concourse. Western Michigan won 6-4, by the way.
Yeah.
But that was kind of on the afterburner, considering Bridgestone Arena had its pretty crazy issues on, I believe, 6th Avenue, whatever it was. But
Sure.
It was the second water main leak within a very short a period of time, too. So yeah, it was, if you get a chance to go on Twitter and check out Bridgestone Arena and the water leak, it certainly was crazy. And I feel bad for those players who were hopefully excited to play in a National Hockey League rink, unfortunately. The final one here, Michigan State traveling to Miami for some non-conference action. It was the Spartans, 5-3 and 4-0, kind of handily taking care of the Red Hawks. So the Spartans team is certainly rolling in the right direction. Let's get to some conference standings here after we look at what's on tap. Colorado College travels to Duluth this weekend. Western Michigan travels to Omaha. Arizona State travels to Denver. Miami is off. They have St. Cloud State next. And St. Cloud will play host to North Dakota, which we'll preview in just a few moments. However, NCHC rankings, Denver sits atop the standings again, the only team to really buy any sort of separation at this point at 6-2. They're at 19 points. Western Michigan in second with 12. St. Cloud in third, 1 point behind at 11. Omaha moving all the way up from 7 to 4. They are now at 9 points, followed by Duluth and CC deadlocked at 8 points apiece. North Dakota in 7th at 2-3-1 with 7 points, and Miami right behind them at 1-6-1 with 4 points. Their lone victory coming against the Fighting Hawks. Nick, before we get to St. Cloud, let's take a quick little glance at some other conferences here. Atlantic Hockey, first of all, RIT, Sacred Heart at 23 points, and American International at 17. AIC somehow is just not the team to beat anymore. And the other curious thing is that Air Force only has 7 points in 8 games played in the conference, which they had a pretty hot start to the season as far as contending with some teams. This Atlantic Hockey, which is usually an auto bid this season, has provided some more intrigue as we approach their conference tournaments, certainly. Anything you wanted to add on them?
EIC has been successful largely because of their defensive structure and goaltending. It seems like this year that's not quite the case, and they're not the same. They're not the same teams we saw before because they're having to sort of try to play more offense, which they don't have, shall we say, the biggest offensive punch that other teams have. So it's been a little bit more of a rough go for AIC. But at the end of the day, still not even halfway done with the season yet, Noah.
Yeah, certainly is a very fair point. Let's move over to the ECAC. Really, there's only 3 teams that are kind of in the mix. I guess throw Colgate in there if you want, but really it's Quinnipiac at 18 points, Harvard 1 point behind at 17, and Cornell has snuck up there at 12 points. We'll have to see how they do, but really it's a 2-horse race plus Cornell as a bit of a long shot there. So really this Harvard team, not a half bad hockey team though, keeping pace with Quinnipiac. So certainly don't think they should have been as high in the pairwise as they were, but certainly are threatening within for sure the top 20 or 15 as of right now. They are taking care of business, all things considered. Hockey East here, let's move over to them. This is where things get really interesting because you go all the way down to, even UMass in some senses in the number 8 spot. I mean, Connecticut is first at 24, Northeastern at 22, who's having a quietly good season with Devin Levi on net. Providence at 20 points, Merrimack at 18. That's your top 4. And then UMass Lowell, BU, BC, UMass at 15, 14, 13, and 10, respectively, with a couple of games in hand on the top 2 dogs. Hockey East is suddenly becoming a very difficult race to predict, where I would say maybe anybody in the top 5, maybe 6, certainly has a shot here this year, Nick.
They certainly do. And this is where we've sort of seen Hockey East in the past when it's been good. Whereas you kind of have a bunch of these teams that are jam-packed in there. BC, Boston, I would even throw UMass Lowell, and they're going to have a tough hill to climb because, they're in that 10 to 11 point deficit range. But, things can change quick. We know that. UConn has been a team that, as we say, there's been up and down. Northeastern's been up and down. Providence, Merrimack. We talked about how these teams keep showing us glimpses of really good stuff, only to either the next night or the next weekend tell us the exact opposite story. So it's still wide open. Again, there's still a lot of hockey to be played. And again, it's roll the dice, honestly, at this point. It might actually make better. Or for, what's it, the flip of the coin for, is that, which NFL team has been doing that last couple? Was that,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, just, might as well, because that might have that might be more accurate. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, at least you're not the Vikings against the Cowboys. Boy, was that ugly. Good response this past week. Holy smokes. But anyway, let's stay around the Midwestern region here. The CCHA, Michigan Tech tops at 18 points with 2 more games played than the second place team, Minnesota State at 17. Bowling Green tied at 17 points with 2 more games than the Mavs. Northern Michigan at 13 points with 2 games in hand. Bemidji State only 6 games played for them, and they're only 2 points behind in 11 points. And St. Thomas actually has 10 points in 10 games. I would say Bemidji is kind of an outside looking in, although if they go on a decent run in their next 4 games, they certainly could put themselves in the mix very quickly. So let's say top 5 for now are still in the mix. I don't think St. Thomas really is. And then Ferris and Lake Superior round out the 8-team conference. But Tech is certainly looking good. We talked about Minnesota State. Bowling Green is somehow still in the mix. They've had a really mountain and valley type season. Northern Michigan could use these next couple of games, but the Wildcats are certainly trending in the right direction, and Bemidji State has a chance to really do some damage against St. Thomas this weekend and put themselves right back in the mix. Is there a team or 2 teams in the CCHA that you think that you can say, yep, I believe that they're going to be on top or at least in the top 2, or is this one also a free-for-all?
It's still kind of a free-for-all. To me, I think Michigan Tech stays where it's at. I think they have the right mix together to pull it off. Again, we saw that this past weekend with some of the work that they put in. I'm still not. Let's put it this way. I think Minnesota State can stay pat, but watch out for Bemidji State. I think that they still will rise to the occasion. They're playing a slightly different brand of hockey. They're averaging 34.5 shots a game right now. So they're really trying to turn, shall we say, more driver of offense than being opportunistic. An old former St. Cloud coach might be at the hand of that. Excuse me, Mike Gibbons. But I think they could do it. I really think, as the CCHA, as you mentioned, again, there's not really one team that's sort of taking it by the grasp. So watch out for the Beavers. I think Michigan Tech is the team to beat. And in Minnesota State, I think they have enough in the offense and the defense to sort of at least band-aid their goaltending woes that they've had of recent. But come tournament time, that's when, maybe some exposure time might happen. Who knows? Yeah,
I think Bowling Green has overachieved just a tad here right now. I wonder if they'll come back down to earth, but we'll have to see. In the CCHA, second to last conference here is the Big 10 here. Minnesota tops at 18 points in 8 games played. Every team has 8 games played except for the bottom 2. Michigan State 1 point behind at 17. The Spartans team has had a good conference schedule to start off. Penn State 1 more point behind at 16. I actually believe all 3 of these teams, for sure the Gophers, but I think Penn State and Michigan State could both be a top 4 team in this conference. It's certainly possible. I think Notre Dame has really slipped off. They're at 5. Ohio State is at 4. Michigan, 6 points in 6 games played for them right now. They're sitting at 6th out of 7. Yeah, this Wolverines team. Their non-conference was all right, but yeah, they've kind of slipped up in conference play. I mean, it's not out of the question for the Spartans and Penn State to be in the top 4. I think whatever team joins them along with Minnesota in the top 4 is up for debate. I mean, OSU, Notre Dame, Michigan could all be in there. The only team that's definitely out of it for sure is Wisconsin.
Gee, you don't say.
Yeah. Gophers are the team to beat, but who comes up right behind them, Nick? Any idea?
Ugh. I want to, it's hard because Penn State has been sneaky good. Michigan State to me is probably the next best team, but you can't really count out Ohio State just yet. The only big difference is their goal differentials not great. We'll put it to you that way. So they've kind of slipped at least from their early runs of the season. But to me, it's the Gophers, it's the Spartans, and the Nittany Lions, yes, that I think will be in the top 3 come the end of conference play.
Yeah, and then let's go quickly through the independents. Technically have a ranking. They don't really have a conference per se, but they are kind of in order. Arizona State topping the list, followed by Alaska Fairbanks. Then Long Island, Lindenwood, Alaska Anchorage, Stonehill, although Alaska Anchorage has some boost because of some pairwise victories that have certainly helped them. Moving on over to a quick preview here very briefly. St. Cloud does have North Dakota this upcoming weekend at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center. Pretty characteristic of that matchup in the first month of December. This North Dakota team has certainly showed some chinks in the armor, at least this season. How does St. Cloud get the job done? Do they get the job done? Is it a split? What do we anticipate here?
I'm going to go bold. They're going to sweep them at home.
I agree.
I really do.
Yeah.
And it sounds bold, because we know what North Dakota has been in the past. This is not the same North Dakota team. This is a reason why then when we had our season preview, Noah, that I wasn't as high on North Dakota as you were, simply because of how young they are, and they're showing their youth so far in this first half. Now, the danger with a team coached by Brad Berry is at some point it's going to click. And you certainly hope that it's not this weekend. I don't see that. Defensively, they're struggling. Offensively, they're hit or miss, and you can see the inconsistencies with the squad. I think St. Cloud is the more balanced, better team. I think that they will give their youth, both up front and on their defensive core, a lot of, shall we say, hell. And I think it's going to be a St. Cloud sweep this weekend. I'm
110% with you. I'm like to a T for sure. I think the St. Cloud group has what it takes to get the job done this weekend and carry some big momentum into their final NCHC action afterwards in the following week before the holiday break. Quick glance here at the pairwise. Penn State, Minnesota, Quinnipiac, St. Cloud, Denver are your top 5. I really don't have an issue with that. Quinnipiac a tad high, but they've taken care of business. BU, Michigan State at 7, Merrimack at 8, Harvard, and then Michigan is still stuck at 10 somehow for how difficult the Wolverines conference play has been. UConn slipped all the way down to 11 after that loss to Cornell. UMass, Western Michigan is at 13. I would imagine they would be higher, although that
should be higher.
That loss to the Seawolves at the beginning of the year is going to come back to bite them for sure. Providence at 14 at Tech, and then UMass Lowell. The Mavericks of Minnesota State right behind on the outside looking in. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Cornell in your top 20. North Dakota at 22, followed by Arizona State behind them, and then Omaha in your top 25. Mid-U State's at 28. Wisconsin's still at 30.
I don't know how that's even possible. But all right.
Minnesota Duluth, although the victory against Long Island, who now beat Ohio State, certainly helps them.
It does.
Minnesota Duluth is at 32, right behind BC. Miami at 37. Colorado College at 45, which I think is a disservice to the way they played this season, but that's whatever. Yeah, Alaska Anchorage is down at 60 of 62. So that Western Michigan team might be feeling the after effects of that one, unfortunately. Moving over to the women's side, Nick, St. Cloud was back in action after having a week off. They did get a sweep. We'll get to them in just a few moments. A very handy sweep, by the way. St. Thomas played Mankato Saturday, Sunday of last weekend, 3-1 and 2-0. Mankato cleared both of those games against the Tommies, who have yet to win a game in conference play. Minnesota traveling to Wisconsin last week on that Saturday-Sunday matchup. It was the Gophers, if you remember, in a shootout on the first night, and then Wisconsin winning 4-1 in night number 2, offering us zero clarity on standings after that, of course.
Yep.
Colgate traveling Tuesday, Wednesday, non-conference to Ohio State University, and the Buckeyes had to bring it to a shootout in a 5-4 game there, and then winning 6-2 in night number 2. Bemidji State and Quinnipiac played on Friday, Quinnipiac winning 5-0, and then Bemidji State had Sacred Heart Saturday, where the Beavers won 4-1. Penn State had Minnesota Friday. The Gophers won 5-1 that night, but then dropped Saturday's contest to number 5 Yale 4-3 in the national rankings on Saturday. St. Cloud, last team to play, they had Lindenwood in Lindenwood, a 7-2 victory in night number 1 and 4-2 finish in night number 2. Let's recap the scoring for you on Friday. Taylor Lynn from Tatum Geyer and Clara Himlerova in period number 1, along with Yanina Newland unassisted in the opening frame to make it 2-0. Bailey Burton and Yanina Newland both unassisted tallies to make it 4-0 in period number 2, besides a final marker for a 5-0 lead at the end of period number 2, a power play marker for McKenna Westlow, assisted by Tatum Geyer and Olivia Savar. 6-0 was the score to start period number 3. Taylor Lynn's second of the game from Reagan Bulger and Grace Wolf. And then Lindenwood 2 goals back to make it 6-2 before Svenja Voigt from Emma Gentry. Voigt, yeah. From Emma Gentry and Dale Ross at the very end of that game. It was with like a couple of seconds left, maybe. So shots on goal, 38-24 St. Cloud State. Faceoffs, 39 for 62 for a 62.9% in the draw. And then 1 for 3 on the power play, 6 for 6 perfect on the kill. And Sonia Hola stopped 22 of 24. And Saturday's contest meant that Lindenwood struck first in period number 1 before the Huskies answered to make it 1-1 after 20. A power play goal from Yanina Newland, Grace Wolf, Taylor Lynn tallying assists. Lindenwood, a power play marker of their own to open the second period before Clara Himlerova scored for Yanina Newland and Taylor Lynn. Once again, a great weekend for all of them in period number 2. And then St. Cloud took it home with 2 goals in period number 3. Taylor Lynn from Avery Myers and Newland, and then Olivia Savar from Yanina Newland once again, earning Yanina Newland WCHA Forward of the Week this past week.
Much deserved, yes.
Yeah, she looked very good. 32-29 were the shots St. Cloud tallied in night number 2. They were 60.3% in the faceoff circle at 44 for 73, so a much better effort for them in the faceoff dot overall this weekend. 1 for 4 on the power play, 7 for 8 on the kill, though, giving up a lot of power play opportunities, a combined 14 this weekend. And JoJo Chobak stopped 27 of 29. Nick, this St. Cloud team, they didn't really need the weekend, just simply because of the fact that it was non-conference, but it certainly was a confidence booster, and they took care of business, and they bolstered their non-conference schedule should they need it for whatever reason. Yanina Newland, Taylor Lind, what a fantastic weekend for them. We talked about those top-end players and the players that especially Taylor Lind has really turned into. This women's team, not a whole lot to say because they took care of business, but what you can say is very positive.
Very positive, and the big playmakers that we have seen over the years in Newland, Taylor Lind, have shown up, right? These are the girls that you want to see find the score sheet, get rewarded because they are the better players. Himlerova also adding to the score sheet as well. So fantastic, right?
She played defense, I believe, because I think Tatum Geyer got hurt early in Saturday's contest, and she was on the back end for most of the night and certainly looked good. Helped that the opponent was not as strong on paper, but certainly was very serviceable on the back end.
Yeah, and that's what a player like Clara Himlerova, again, the former Olympian, can do, is that she understands the game from multiple facets and she can fill in where needed. She's a leader in that way, so it doesn't surprise me that she could play that, and at least hold her own and, dare I say, add a point to the score sheet, right? A goal, as you mentioned, the second period.
Yeah, certainly would agree. What's on tap? Ohio State travels to Duluth. Wisconsin is in Bemidji. Mankato travels to Minnesota, and St. Thomas a home-and-home with the St. Cloud State Huskies. They will be in St. Cloud Friday and in St. Thomas on Saturday. Standings-wise, Ohio State still a healthy margin for them at 12-1-1. They're at 37 points. Minnesota improves to 29 points, have yet to lose in regulation this season. Wisconsin at 8-1-1. Or that can't be right because the Huskies beat them in regulation. I don't know what I was looking at. Anyway, Wisconsin is in third at 25 points. Minnesota Duluth in fourth at 16. Mankato right behind at 15. And then St. Cloud in sixth at 13. Of course, a couple of conference games going on there. Bemidji State well behind with 3 points, and St. Thomas yet to win in 10 appearances in conference play. St. Cloud does have St. Thomas again this weekend. I think it's pretty safe to say, Nick, on paper, if they play the way that they are capable of playing, this should hopefully be a done deal, hopefully. Yep. Moving on to the Minnesota Wild, our last topic in the main portion of the show. 9-9-2 on the season, 20 points. They, at least as of yesterday, have not updated this, but they were 5 points out of third in the Central and 2 points out of second in the wild card. If anything, it would have gotten worse for them, not better.
It's gotten better. They're now 10-9-2, 22 Colorado. So they're from third. They're 3 points out. Now, mind you, Colorado has 2 games in hand. I'm actually looking at it right now from the NHL website. Yeah. But the wild card spot, that's going to be where things get a little bit goofy, right? So since you mentioned it, wild card for the Western Conference, the Wild currently sitting, what would you guess?
Well, probably in the second wild card spot now.
They are technically tied with Edmonton and St. Louis with 22 points. However, because of the regulation plus overtime wins, Edmonton and St. Louis both get the tiebreaker. They have 11 and 10 respectively. Wild have 9 ROW, so they are sitting in that third spot.
So they actually didn't change. They didn't change because every team actually tally points. So they're actually in the same spot as when we recorded it last because each team had a victory, basically. So those 2 teams were still above them. Just point values change. I'm guessing the Wild's goal differential has changed now, though. They should be at 0. Yeah, they were -1 earlier, so they almost blew that lead against Arizona yesterday, though.
They almost did, yes.
Yeah. So past week, Winnipeg a 6-1 victory, Toronto 4-3 loss, and then Arizona a 4-3 victory yesterday. They've got Edmonton this Thursday, Anaheim on Saturday, and then they're in Dallas on Sunday. So finishing up the last 2 games of the homestand before heading to visit the North Stars. Anyway,
funny.
Yeah, so notables, we'll talk about the Ryan Reeves trade, but why don't we talk about, since we mentioned the schedule, why don't we talk about the Toronto game and specifically the net moorings coming off 3 times on Matt Murray's side. Michael Russo tweeted that somebody had tweeted at him that the net also came off 1 time on Marc-Andre Fleury's end. Russo said, no, it didn't. Actually, 4:26 to period number 3, the moorings actually did come off on Marc-Andre Fleury's end. I don't know if this was an ice issue coupled by some gamesmanship with Matt Murray on top of this. I'm not saying it wasn't intentional. It reminds me of the Spencer Knight situation with the Huskies a couple years ago. And if you're a goalie, you use it to your advantage. Wild certainly needed more help in that game as they were pressing late, but is this something that officials should start cracking down on more? How do you police this? Is it policeable? Is it possible? Was Matt Murray doing this intentionally, do you think?
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Well, and maybe the other tweet that you missed from Michael Russo was that in the previous game, Matt Murray also had the net come off 3 separate times in a different arena. So there's a precedent there.
Yeah. I didn't miss it, by the way. But
no, well, you didn't mention it. So you gave me the impression that you missed it. But here's what we did not miss. Hold on.
He just had mentioned that he said explicitly that Marc-Andre Fleury didn't have the net come off its moorings in period 3, and it did happen. So
okay, So is it enforceable? No.
Yeah,
it really isn't. And here's why I say that. How can you really sit there as an officiating crew and prove he did this with intention? Good luck. Do the optics look like it is intentional? Of course. But as the officiating crew, I would have a very difficult time believing that they would be able to swing a disciplinary sword at this, just because, again, I just don't know how you could sit there to a goaltender and say, okay, I saw you extend the arm or or extend the leg here, and different parts of the game you did, and you did this one on purpose to take away scoring opportunity. Good luck with that. Because that John Tortorella on the bench is going to have words with that. I don't know. I just don't know how you enforce that. I really don't.
Is there a way, and I know that everybody plays goaltender a little different. Is there a way, though, where you have somebody who's privy to what a natural motion for a goaltender is and notices, like, for example, you mentioned, oh, I saw your leg or your arm push off. Is there a point where you could see it happening in a very unnatural situation for what a goaltender does? Is that ever a possibility for someone to be able to see that?
The question is, Noah, not that you notice it, is how can you prove it? Again, it's not that you are buying what you're selling. It's how do you sell what you're seeing and your judgment to not only the player, but also the team. That's the argument. And that's why you don't see this ever being enforced, is because, again, how could you really convincingly tell that story to the team and the player that I can prove to you, or I've seen you push off toward that post and purposely knock it off because of this and that? It just does not seem that plausible.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I just throwing it out there for people so we can kind of have a discussion here.
No, I get it.
Yeah,
it's for folks who are saying, Nick, no, that's absolutely crazy. There's of course a way you can tell. I'm not saying that there's no way you can tell. Again, the referee and your eyes and my eyes are all seeing the same thing. But again, if you're the referee, you're the disciplinarian. Your job is to show intent, right?
How do you write it into a rule book? You know what I mean?
Right. It's how do you make that, as a disciplinary action? Hard to say, because again, is it, shall we say, gamesmanship? 100% it's gamesmanship. I think we both know what's happening. And when I say both, I mean myself and everybody else, including the referee crew. They know what's happening too. So is the right way to have a discussion with the goaltender? Is the right way to pause? Was there an ice issue? I've a hard time believing that it was an ice issue, especially since the precedent was set that this was happening in a different arena just a few nights earlier. Yeah. I personally think that there is intent from Matt Murray in doing it. Again, it's how, from the other side of the coin, how can you call that action out when that same movement, when that same push off from right to left is part of your natural movement as a goaltender? You're trying to seal the post. You're trying to do this and that. How do you differentiate one versus the other and be able to stand on 2 feet and defend that call? Yeah. Not a very easy one.
Certainly would agree. Ryan Reeves, let's defend this one or not defend it, depending on who you talk to. Ryan Reeves traded for a 2025 fifth rounder. In fact, he played again the other night. I know he didn't have the greatest debut. I mean, he was dash one and took a penalty on the other one, the other play that led to a goal against Toronto. But, you look at, I want to see if I don't think he had a point, but I want to be 110% sure. Yeah, did not have a point. His last game against Arizona, he had one shot on goal, played just under 15 minutes, had 20 shifts. People are kind of trying to justify this trade where, Jordan Greenway finally returned to the lineup here. We got Ryan Hartman out long-term. You wonder if they're just looking for some grit on the fourth line, especially with Marco Rossi now not occupying space, as we'll get to in just a few moments here. A lot of talk has been about how Ryan Reeves he's 35 now, doesn't move all that great.
We know who he is.
Right.
Let's call it what it is.
But we've talked a little bit about character guys in that locker room, and something that as of until recent, the Minnesota Wild franchise has kind of lacked a little bit. And guys play a little bit taller and a little bit bigger when you have him and Marcus Foligno standing side by side in some senses in that locker room. Is there a case to be made to say that Ryan Reeves, maybe doesn't bring a ton on the ice, but really having him as a locker room guy is as beneficial, if not more? I certainly think a fifth rounder is an overpay, but at the same time, is this something that you think Bill Guerin and Dean Evason identified enough to say, hey, we need somebody that brings this energy, this spunk, this, I'm going to stand up for you whenever type of thing. Is he a welcome addition in Minnesota that you think is going to pay dividends, or do you think it's an experiment that's not going to last very long?
I have a different take on this, and I'm surprised this take has not been out there more. I feel like this is insurance for Jordan Greenway.
Yeah.
And here's why I say that. He played one game, was out for a while, played another, a couple of shifts, was out for a while again. Yeah. I don't think he's fully healthy.
Yeah.
And by having a similar body who plays a similar game, albeit not nearly the offensive upside and not nearly the youth, but what I think this will allow the team to do, Noah, and where I really think that they're looking at this from, is I think they're going to really try to be careful with Jordan Greenway.
Yeah.
That is my take on it. I think that the grit thing, sure, there's something to that. The protection thing of players, sure, but Rossi's not here. Yes, you have Kaprizov, and he's been couple different times this season. Just ask Drew Doughty of the LA Kings. They have kind of picked on him a little bit. And if you're looking to be a playoff performing team, now Ryan Reeves has been a part of a lot of playoff teams because he can do some things. But he can be the physical presence. He can be a good net front presence. And more importantly, he can be that response guy if Shea, your all-star player, is getting targeted, for lack of a better word. But I really feel like this has more to do with Jordan Greenway than it does anything else. That's my way of looking at it. Because I don't know if was Jordan Greenway on the ice against Arizona. I don't recall him being on the ice.
Well, let's take a look right here. I thought I remember, but that's the thing is we talked about Jordan Greenway, right? And the problem with his injury is it seems very shoulder related, and sometimes shoulders just don't heal well. It's time. It's kind of, or sometimes for some people, I mean, I had a guy who, was from my hometown that we played together. He ended up playing the USHL for the Fargo Force.
Okay.
And, you talk about, he had 27 shifts actually. So hopefully he's returning to form. But I mean, you talk about my former teammate. I mean, he had 3 dislocated shoulders on either side, and now he can hardly lift his arms above his head. Like, some people's shoulders just don't return. They just don't return to form for whatever reason. Shoulders are bad. Backs are obviously potentially career ending, and then ankles and knees. They're just really, and then hips if you're a goaltender, they're just really difficult areas of the body that sometimes just don't come back to form. So I certainly agree. Like we mentioned, we talked about it a little bit earlier, is that Jordan Greenway was not 100%. Ryan Hartman, of course, out long-term here. This, if anything, is insurance. Do I think it should have been maybe a 7th rounder instead of a 5th? Sure. But at that point, a 5th rounder doesn't really, it's kind of like handing out candy on Halloween a little bit. They're kind of collateral at that point.
Noah, Kaprizov was a 5th round pick, so the Minnesota Wild just lost this trade already by proxy. What are you talking?
Diamond in the rough. Kaprizov is the exception to the rule, right? And you know that very well. You think about, there are some great guys. Henrik Lundqvist, Pavel Datsyuk, guys like that.
Wasn't Datsyuk a 6th round pick?
I think he was a 5th rounder. I think. But that's the thing, is like you have guys who are in the later rounds that certainly have a chance, but the percentage is not high, and the development path has to be high too. One of the things that you also have to think about is that, if someone is a 5th round pick in a given year, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad hockey player. I think Braden Point, for example, which he could have been a Minnesota Wild player very easily. It's not necessarily that they're worse than anybody else. It's depending on the players in front of them and the age.
Pavel Datsyuk was a 6th round, 171st overall pick.
So the thing is too, is that when you have players who are in those lower rounds, it means that they might still be young and they haven't progressed to that point where they're NHL ready, but a team feels that they're going to get to that point. So the later round picks are guys that you identify a trait that they do exceptionally well. They might be an average player in every other facets, but they might shoot harder than everybody. They might have a natural goal scoring ability. They might be an otherworldly defender where their plus minus is plus 85 in a given season somehow. Like, those are the things that you're trying to identify. Slight overpay, but again, it's probably not going to cost the Wild at that point. What is interesting for this Wild team. Speaking of draft picks, and our last topic in the main portion of the show, Marco Rossi officially headed to the minors for some confidence boosting, so to speak, in the Iowa Wild. His former junior coach, Alexander Terigny, who of course was tagged as the head coach for the Canada World Junior team not too long ago, he said not to worry, and he'll reset himself. He had a great preseason and kind of saved all of his points, unfortunately, for then. I don't mind the move. I think Rossi needs it. I do think he'll be back in Minnesota by the end of the season. I certainly think he has that ability. Just depends on how quickly he finds his game. Are you worried at all about Marco Rossi, or do you think we're just kind of letting it play out, and we're playing the long game here? I've seen people on Twitter, they're like, we need to trade him. He's -4 with 1 point in 16 games. I'm like, what are you people smoking? Like, do you not know how hockey development works? He's like 20.
Yeah, just turned 21 actually.
Yeah.
But he's young, and if there's one thing about Marco Rossi that you can hang your head on, this is the sort of let's put it this way. The story with him and the long COVID, right, with the heart condition and having to work through that. When Marco Rossi is pinned in a corner, if anything, he showed that he says, okay, if you're going to tell me I can't do it, let me show you how I can. So I think that the plan is to get him back to Minnesota. I think it'll be well before the end of the season. But you talk about player development, and the opposite of Shane Wright, where a player clearly has the skill, he clearly has the abilities right now to compete. Marco Rossi has the skills. He has not shown, right, his ability to translate that to the NHL.
Play confidently, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
We talk about how you handle draft picks and what the right move is, right? We're not talking about ice time. We're talking about a player that is young and needs to rebuild his game, rebuild his confidence. This is the correct move. You do not want to put them meaning Rossi, in a healthy scratch all the time. We know that he works hard. We know that he's got the skill set, the Swiss Army knife. For some players of his caliber and because of his age, the light bulb just hasn't clicked yet. That links all of his skill sets to be a continuous on ice product yet, right? And for people out there who are trying to trade this guy, again, what the hell are you smoking? One. Number two, if anybody went to work and had a couple of bad weeks and you got traded off, it doesn't look so great, right?
Yeah.
So, and at the professional level here, I think we all could sit here and agree that Marco Rossi will be a good player. This is a needed more mental reset than it is anything else, right? Sometimes, pro athletes in general, they're creatures of a mental, it's a lot between the ears that has to be coached. And part of it is working through when times are tough. Rossi will get there. I think finding some success in the AHL will come to him with time. I don't think it's going to take him very long. And regardless of the Wild's injury situation, there's always going to be a spot for him ready when they feel like he's playing confidently. You bring him back up. Maybe if there's one change, you put him maybe in a top six role to maybe get some of those high quality players around him. Maybe you try it then. I don't know, but this is the correct move for this player at this moment. This is what he needs. It's more of a mental reset. It's not what I think a lot of people look at it as, this is not a final stamp on what he doesn't have. This is more of, we know what you have. Go down there and bring it back up to speed again. Then we'll get you back up here.
Swiss Army knife meet Austrian Army knife. Hopefully the Wild can rebuild that toolbox, and Tim Army, ironically enough, building that up with the Iowa Wild. Boy, that was bad. And hopefully get him back to the big club in Minnesota. Well, speaking of big plays, anyway, we're going to head on to our extra ice session, wrapping things up in the main portion of the show. We're going to talk about the new wave that certainly somebody like John Tortorella would absolutely love. And welcome into the extra ice session. Nick Maxon alongside myself, Noah Grant here. Again, happy Thanksgiving to all of those who had hopefully a wonderful holiday weekend here. We are just nearing the end of our show, and we are talking about some top shelf plays literally. The Michigan goal, the lacrosse style goal, whatever you want to call it. Throw even the Trevor Zegras connection if you want to throw the over the net scooping as well too. These skilled plays, we saw another one from Logan Cooley, former Minot Minotauro forward. Wilmer Skoog did it for BU a couple weeks ago. Again, that's his like second or third in collegiate play. We're seeing it at the NHL level in certain spurts, obviously too. Speaking of the Toros, Chase LaPinta, who had one against North Iowa last month, tried it almost pulled it off against Bismarck last weekend. And I talked to Chase when I was on the ice with them during the All-Star Skills Comp, and I said, you almost did it again, and he just kind of gave me a wry smile. It's become so routine for players to make the puck turn into a vertical object and play pucks in the air. We saw even the tic-tac-toe play with the Boston Bruins. I believe it was Patrice Bergeron that batting a puck out of the air, and then another player picking it up, and then a backdoor tap in that hockey game. You know, the skill development and the focus on skill development has changed for young hockey players. That, of course, is evident as we've gone through here, no matter what a guy like John Tortorella says. It is fun for the game of hockey here. But the way that players have made it so routine and they do it with speed so regularly here, I don't think the game of hockey is ever going to change back or change away from this style, Nick. I think goals like this and plays like this, I think they're here to stay. I think this is the new wave of what we're going to see in the game of hockey, where that play behind the net suddenly, which for those who don't know, a guy behind the net is generally not a threat. This is turned guys at any area of the ice into a legitimate threat. I mean, is this something that you think is the new way forward for some young hockey players that have a high end of skill to like add into their daily repertoire?
Ooh, I'm debating whether my old man syndrome should kick in.
Yeah. And the reason I mention high end of skill is because I think where you're about to go is that you're going to say, why are you practicing that move if you can't do other things? You got to walk before you learn how to run, before you learn how to sprint kind of thing? No,
I think a couple of things you have right. This is here to stay. And it's exciting because games evolve. Right? The way that you have to attack the opposition to try to give them a new thread to worry about. We all can think about the cross seam pass. We can talk about the low to high, the one-timer from the point. It's stuff that we as hockey people know very well. Also, the players on the ice know that very well, which means there's a lot of, we talk about how hockey is an anticipatory sport, whereas you can anticipate where if a guy is going to button hook if he's one-on-one coming into the zone on the wing hand side, right? You can anticipate that North Dakota's going to come with 3-4 layers when they're carrying the puck in the zone with possession, right?
Right.
Where I'm going with this is that play is not something you generally anticipate. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about trying to be a step ahead, or more so give them a new wrinkle, something that they don't expect, especially when you combine that in an area of the ice, as you mentioned, that you're not expecting a high-level threat to come from. Oh shit! Right? So, it's kind of a double-edged sword on one side. It really is. But I think where the game also kind of gets fun is I want to see what the response is going to be on the defensive side, right? Because the film's out there, right? So do goaltenders? Then when Trevor Zegras is going behind the net, do they just not go in the butterfly because they want to seal off that top post, right?
Yeah.
Do they, so what's the trick? Or are they going to start doing the Ron Hextall come on that and just like cross check them and just bowl them? Like seriously, like
and that's where one thing leads to another. Let's say the weak side defenseman is stepping down and he's like, well, I'm going to cut off this play. Well, if Zegras then floats the puck past that defenseman, that D-man just left the guy that he was covering wide open,
Right.
Like offense, we talk so much. I think it's funny about how we had the conversation, with the reduction of goalie gear, for example, and the scoring in the NHL was down. And there was even the asinine talk about, we're going to make the nets bigger and stuff like that. And they talked about, how can we increase scoring again? this new wave of players has done it almost naturally because they found new creative ways to score. And I think it's great for the game. And I think people, don't get me wrong. I, as much as anybody else, love a 1-0 or 2-1 low scoring affair where it's a goaltender's duel and it's save after amazing save and a great defensive battle. But at the same time, there is something to be said for these games who are 6-5, 5-4, and guys going back and forth, heavyweight action where each play is tic-tac-toe, beautiful setup, beautiful plays like this. I really wonder what the next trend is. When I was a kid, it was some kid in the QMJHL named Sidney Crosby who went between his legs to score a goal. And then Kyle Oposo did it for the Gophers. And then it got done at another level. Now it's the Michigan, right, kind of resurging and becoming an everyday play instead of this quirky, we saw one finally this year. Now it's, we saw one yesterday. When's the next one coming this week? Has Yami Kranola entered the chat? You know what I mean? Like it's right. It's becoming a routine play. I wonder what the next creative play is going to be. And I wonder why, as you mentioned, the old man brain, I wonder why there's so much pushback against plays that we don't deem to be natural in our hockey brains, so to speak.
And I think that's where you thought I was going to go, which is, okay, you have this skill set that normally doesn't translate to a positive on the score sheet. I'll tell you what, if I tried that, I can't lift the puck like that at speed. Number two, I'll probably hurt somebody because my stick will be above, my own face. Number three, it's probably a turnover and it's going the other way, right? I think that's where the old school brain is that this isn't hockey to them. John Tortorella, I know you're listening. I know that's what you think.
It's not a high percentage play, as they would say.
Yeah, essentially. But the reality is it's becoming a high percentage play because let's not think about it. Trevor Zegras, of all the times he scored that, he's been moving the entire time.
Yeah.
He hasn't been standing still where it is, again, the number one rule in hockey, you got to keep your feet moving, right? So when he's picking up in stride and then all in one motion, kind of we talk about, the catch and release, right? How Austin Matthews has almost like brought that to a new level. Yeah. Trevor Zegras has brought the lacrosse move or the Michigan to that new level, which is I'm literally just going to escape and then I put it up on my end, just go bang. And you have to be aware of that, right? Or you have to be aware that he also is a very smart hockey mind, which is he could fake it now, throw a puck, a great back across, and you're thinking, oh crap, he's coming back for this. You overcommit. And now my other side of the net's wide open. I kind of think that's where the next wave is going to come from, is he's going to start to fake that and then start to look for somebody backdoor. That's just me.
Heaven forbid he's offside, but
right. But like you said, I'm with you. This is the new wave of creative thinking to do something that we thought was unheard of or unattainable, and it turned into something that is a high percentage play for him. He can do that. And we've seen it multiple times and how he's able to execute it. And again, what's going to be, and I love the analogy, it's the end of the bat barrel, right? Which is Zegras has kind of got the top hand right now. How do teams try to combat that, try to get that upper hand again? Like you mentioned, does the weak side D come down? Do they try to play him more physically? And maybe not in the most legal way, right? Sometimes hockey does that, where you just go, there's a loose puck. I'm just going to take him out of the play because if I don't, he's going to pick this up. He's going to whip it right back in the top corner from behind the net. It's not fair. Yeah. It's interesting. I
just think, like, my final clarifying point, there's two sides to this, because we also talk about, you got to learn how to crawl before you can walk, before you can run. Don't be practicing this skill at the expense of your ice time to make sure that you are a good skater. You shoot the puck hard, you pass the puck well, those fundamental things that make up the other 98.5% of a hockey player, right? But when you have that high end level skill and you can pull it off, I think there are a lot of coaches who will say, I don't want to encourage this because it forms bad habits, or it forms, not thinking about the game appropriately. And there is some truth to that in the sense that you don't want a kid trying it every time. But at the same time, I think if my lesson would be, as a young player and as a coach, encourage these players to try things within the bounds of being creative, but also make them understand there's a time and a place for it, right? Like, you don't want to be doing it every time. You don't want to make it predictable. You want to still be playing the game the right way, fundamentals, blah, blah, blah. But if you see an opening, if the moment is right, if you're behind the net and somebody's giving you space, and you can pull it off with speed, or even if you can't pull it off, but you think you almost can, and you give it a chance and
shot.
Yeah, encourage that creativity. And I think that that's where you talk about the old school mentality is kind of scary, is that coaches aren't willing to even consider it. Now, don't let a player run free will with it, and certainly make sure they're paying attention to other aspects of the game, but encourage that middle ground of creativity when the situation presents itself. And then not only are you creating skill, you're creating hockey IQ to recognize when the situation is appropriate.
You beat me to my next point, right? Which is, it's the hockey IQ is that